John had always believed that simplicity was key. He was not the kind of person to boast or draw attention to himself. Even though he ran one of the largest corporations in the city, he chose to dress humbly and blend in. His demeanor was calm and reserved, and he preferred to interact with people on a personal level, rather than flaunt his status or wealth. That morning, John entered the tall glass building of his company. The air inside was cool and smelled of fresh coffee and polished marble floors. The staff moved quickly, dressed in their finest suits and professional attire, their heels clicking sharply against the tiles. John stood out only because he was dressed in a simple brown jacket, a clean shirt, and worn jeans. Nothing about him screamed CEO, just a regular man trying to make his way to the Human Resources Department to discuss a new initiative. He was not there for the usual reasons. It was a quiet visit, one where he just wanted to see how things were operating behind the scenes. His thoughts were interrupted as he walked toward the elevator when Karen, the building's office manager, spotted him from across the room. Karen had worked in the office for over 5 years, and in that time, she had built up an air of superiority. She felt entitled, especially in her position. She had grown used to controlling the flow of people in the building and often saw herself as the one in charge, even though she wasn't technically the boss. To her, people who weren't dressed in expensive suits didn't belong in the polished halls of the company. So, when she saw John walking toward the elevator in his simple outfit, she assumed he was just another maintenance worker, or maybe even a lost visitor. Karen wasn't a kind person. She had little patience for anyone she deemed below her. And today, with her power trip in full swing, she was already irritated by the man who didn't fit her vision of who should be allowed in the building. Without a second thought, she made her way over to him, her heels clicking sharply as she approached. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cold and condescending, "you can't just walk around here. If you need help, go to the service desk." John paused and looked at her, his face showing no signs of anger. He had no intention of explaining himself, but Karen wasn't done yet. She assumed he didn't know where he was going, so she began giving him orders, telling him to go down the hall to the back of the building, where the real workers were supposed to be. She couldn't be bothered to listen to him when he told her he was looking for the Human Resources Department. Her mind was already made up, he was just another low-level employee who didn't belong. Without thinking, Karen took a step closer to him. "I don't have time to explain things to you. You don't belong here." John felt her hand move toward his face before he even had time to react. The slap came quickly, a sharp sting that caught him completely off guard. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to make a statement. The room around them seemed to pause, as if time itself had slowed. People in the building continued their tasks, but they all looked up for a split second, watching the scene unfold. The slap was not just a physical act. It was a statement, a clear sign of Karen's deep-seated beliefs that certain people, particularly those who weren't dressed in the right clothes, didn't deserve respect. To her, John was nothing more than another nameless worker, beneath her, and the slap was a way of showing her authority. John didn't flinch or raise his voice. He simply stood there, his hand resting calmly at his side. His expression didn't change. He wasn't shocked by the action itself, but by the fact that a person in a position of power, even a small one like Karen, would resort to such childish behavior. He knew he had two choices in that moment: he could react emotionally, and perhaps give Karen exactly what she wanted, a confrontation, or he could stay silent, and let his actions speak louder than anything he could say. He chose the latter. Karen, on the other hand, stood there, breathing heavily. Her face flushed with a mix of anger and satisfaction, as if she had just won some small victory. She had expected John to shrink away, to apologize or back off, but that didn't happen. Instead, John just looked at her, his eyes calm and steady. It was as if she had slapped a wall, and now, she was waiting for some kind of reaction. The few people who had witnessed the event from the sidelines were also waiting, unsure of how this would play out. They had never seen Karen act this way before. She was always so composed and professional until now. The tension in the air was thick, but still, John said nothing. After a long silence, John finally spoke. His voice was even and calm, almost gentle. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" Karen blinked. She had assumed he was just a nobody, someone who didn't matter, but his words didn't match what she had expected. The calmness in his voice struck her as odd. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her like that, especially not someone she considered beneath her. John continued, "I think it's time for me to introduce myself." He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card. He handed it to her without saying another word. Karen glanced at the card. Her eyes widened, her face draining of color. The name on the card read, John Harris, CEO of the corporation. A cold shiver ran down Karen's spine. She felt her legs go weak, and she struggled to hold onto the business card as if it might slip through her fingers. Her mouth went dry. This wasn't just any man she had slapped. This was the CEO, the very person who ran the entire corporation she worked for. John stood there, watching her, giving her a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation. He had expected a reaction, but nothing could have prepared Karen for the realization that she had just humiliated the very person who had the power to change her life one way or the other. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Karen was left speechless, unable to form the words she needed to apologize. She tried, but all that came out was a weak, John raised a hand to stop her. "You don't need to say anything," he said. "But I think it's time we talk to your superior." He turned toward the elevator, gesturing for her to follow him. Karen stood there, still trying to gather herself. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she had no idea how badly her actions would affect her in the days to come. The realization was sinking in slowly, but it wasn't the slap itself that was the most painful part. It was the deep shame she felt for not recognizing the worth of the person standing in front of her. She would soon learn that this was not just an unfortunate encounter. It was about to change everything. Karen's heart was racing as she stood there, her fingers clutching the business card that John had handed her. The words on the card seemed to blur together as she stared at them, still in disbelief. She had just slapped the CEO of the corporation she worked for. The very same person who had the power to fire her, to end her career with a single word, and she had slapped him as if he were nothing. She had let her prejudices take control, and now, she was paying the price. Her stomach twisted into knots, and her knees felt weak. She had no idea what to do next. John, meanwhile, was calm. He had anticipated her shock, and he didn't seem angry. It wasn't rage that filled him, but rather a sense of quiet authority. He had always believed that leadership didn't require shouting or making a scene. It was about making decisions with purpose and dignity. As he looked at Karen, he wasn't interested in making her feel small. He wanted her to understand the weight of her actions and the lesson that needed to be learned. He turned to face her, his expression serious but not harsh. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady. "We need to speak to your superior." Karen stood frozen for a moment longer, trying to gather her thoughts. She had been certain she would be in control today, that she could get away with treating people the way she always did. But now, she was a pawn in someone else's game, and she had no idea how to make it right. She had never thought about the consequences of her actions, never realized how far-reaching they could be. The slap had felt so simple, so quick, but now it felt like the most foolish mistake she had ever made. Karen slowly started to follow John toward the elevator, each step heavier than the last. She couldn't look him in the eye. How could she? How could she face the man she had just humiliated? The fear that had settled in her chest now turned into something else, a sickening realization that her whole career could be in jeopardy. The elevator ride felt long. Neither of them spoke as the doors slid open and they stepped inside. Karen's mind raced, and her thoughts were all over the place. What if John decided to fire her on the spot? What if her actions were so unforgivable that she'd never work in the corporate world again? Would anyone take her seriously after what she had done? John stood next to her, his hands in his pockets, staring ahead. He didn't seem rushed, didn't seem like he had any intention of embarrassing her further. He simply let her stew in her thoughts, understanding that she needed to come to terms with what had happened. The elevator hummed as they descended, the silence between them becoming more unbearable by the second. Finally, the elevator reached the ground floor, and John led the way to the executive office. Karen followed behind, each step feeling like a mile. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart seemed to beat faster with every moment. She had never been in such a situation before, and she didn't know how to handle it. She was used to being the one who controlled things, the one who gave the orders. She was never the one who had to answer for her actions, at least not in such a way. They reached the office, and John pushed open the door. Inside sat the Vice President of Operations, Mr. Daniels, a stern but fair man who had worked at the company for years. He looked up from his desk as they entered, his eyebrows raising slightly as he saw the tension in the air. "John, what's going on?" he asked, glancing between the two of them. John didn't waste any time. "Karen here made a serious mistake today," he said calmly, his tone still even. "She slapped me." Mr. Daniels blinked in surprise. "What?" he asked, sitting up straighter in his chair. "Are you serious?" John nodded. "I'm serious. I don't think she realized who I was when it happened." Karen could feel her face flush with embarrassment as she stood there in silence. She had no idea what to say. She had always been a person who prided herself on her ability to talk her way out of situations, but now, no words came to her. She wanted to apologize, wanted to beg for forgiveness, but she couldn't get the words out. Instead, she just stood there, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mr. Daniels looked at her with a mix of confusion and concern. "Karen," he said, his voice softer now. "How did this happen?" Karen's voice was barely a whisper. I thought he was just another worker," she stammered. "I thought he didn't belong here. And I slapped him." John watched her carefully as she spoke, his expression unchanged. He could see the regret in her eyes, but he wasn't interested in her excuses. He wasn't here to let her off easy. He needed her to learn that actions had consequences, especially when it came to racism and prejudice. "You thought he didn't belong here," Mr. Daniels said slowly, repeating her words. He turned to John. I'm sorry, John. I had no idea this was happening." John waved off his apology. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about how we treat each other in this company. Karen needs to understand that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable. We need to make sure she learns that, not just for herself, but for everyone here." Mr. Daniels nodded in agreement. He turned back to Karen, his gaze firm. "Karen," he said, his voice steady. "You've been a part of this company for a long time. But this kind of behavior, this attitude is not something we tolerate here. We're a team, and we treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are or how they look." Karen's throat tightened as she struggled to hold back tears. She had always believed that her position and authority gave her the right to judge others, but now she realized just how wrong she was. She had hurt someone who had every right to be there, someone who was more powerful and accomplished than she could ever imagine, and for what? To feel superior for a moment? I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was wrong." John looked at her, his expression unreadable. He could see she was genuinely remorseful, but that wasn't enough. Apologies didn't change what had happened. He needed to show her the full weight of her actions. Apologies are the first step, John said calmly. But they don't erase what's been done. We'll take this one step at a time. And Karen, I hope you truly learn from this. The room was silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of what had just transpired. Karen was left to reflect on the terrible mistake she had made, and John's quiet authority left an indelible mark on everyone present. The days after the incident felt like a whirlwind for Karen. Her entire world had turned upside down, and she couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. The humiliation of slapping John, the CEO of the corporation, had left her with a sense of dread that lingered over every moment. She had never imagined that something so small could have such massive consequences, but now she knew she had made a mistake that could cost her everything. The following morning, Karen was called into a meeting with John and Mr. Daniels, her superior. She had been nervous ever since the previous day, and now, as she made her way to the conference room, her steps felt heavy. She had no idea what to expect. Would she be fired? Would they give her a chance to redeem herself, or was this the end of her career? When she entered the room, John was already sitting at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but commanding. Mr. Daniels was seated beside him, his face serious but not unkind. As Karen took a seat, she couldn't help but notice the tension in the room. It was as if everyone was waiting for something. John was the first to speak. "Karen," he said, his voice steady but not without a hint of authority, "yesterday was a turning point. Not just for you, but for everyone who works in this company. What happened was wrong, and I think we both know that." Karen nodded, her head bowed. She had never felt more ashamed in her life. She knew that her actions couldn't be undone, no matter how much she regretted them. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong, and I should never have done that." John gave her a small, measured smile. "Apologies are the first step, but it's not enough. You have to prove that you understand why it was wrong. And more importantly, you have to show the entire company that we are all accountable for our actions, no matter our position." Karen swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing larger. She had been expecting some kind of punishment, but this was different. This was about learning, growing, and being held to a standard that she hadn't even realized existed. She was being given a chance to make things right, but it wouldn't be easy. Mr. Daniels spoke next. "We've discussed this as a company, and we believe in second chances. But Karen, it's not just about making an apology. It's about how we act moving forward. We want you to understand what went wrong and how we can all make sure something like this never happens again." John nodded in agreement. "We're not going to fire you, Karen, but this is going to be a learning process. We want you to take responsibility for your actions and do the work to make amends. And it starts here. It starts with you changing the way you see people and how you treat them." Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, unwilling to show weakness. She had already made a mistake, but she wasn't going to make the same one again. She was ready to listen, ready to understand. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," Karen said, her voice firm but soft. "I know I need to change. I know I need to be better. I will do whatever I can to show everyone here that I am sorry and that I'm committed to doing better." John leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "I believe you, Karen. But this is a company, and it's a family here. We treat each other with respect, and that goes beyond just saying the right words. It's about actions. You need to take responsibility and learn what it truly means to respect every person who walks through these doors. You've been given a chance, and it's up to you to prove that you're worthy of it." The conversation went on for another hour, discussing various ways in which Karen could show that she understood the weight of her actions. John and Mr. Daniels explained that they wanted her to undergo diversity and inclusion training, attend meetings where employees could voice their concerns, and work on rebuilding the trust that she had broken. It was clear that this was not going to be an easy road, but Karen was determined to make things right. She realized that this wasn't just about saving her job, it was about transforming herself into someone who could be an example for others. As the meeting came to a close, John stood up and extended his hand to Karen. "We're giving you a chance, Karen. Don't let us down." Karen shook his hand firmly, grateful for the opportunity, but also aware of the hard work ahead. She had learned the hard way that one moment of arrogance could undo everything, and now, it was her responsibility to rebuild what she had broken. Over the next few weeks, Karen threw herself into the training and the lessons. She sat through hours of workshops, discussions, and one-on-one sessions with diversity experts. It wasn't always easy, and at times, Karen found herself uncomfortable with the things she was learning about her own biases. But as difficult as it was, she kept going, knowing that it was the only way to truly change. One day, as she sat in a group discussion, she found herself listening to the experiences of other employees. There was a man from the IT department who spoke about how he had been treated unfairly for years, overlooked for promotions because of his background. There was a woman from marketing who shared how she had been belittled in meetings by higher ups, her ideas dismissed simply because of her gender. Karen listened with a growing sense of shame, realizing that the very things she had done to John were the same things that others had faced. She had been blind to the struggles of those around her, and now, as she heard their stories, she felt the weight of the pain she had caused. By the end of the month, Karen had begun to change. Her colleagues noticed it. She made a point to treat everyone with kindness and respect, no matter their position. She stopped making assumptions about people based on how they looked or what they wore. She apologized to those she had wronged, including John, and she did so sincerely, without any expectation of forgiveness. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but Karen knew she was on the right path. She was learning to be a better person, a better manager, and a better human being. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Karen felt like she was truly growing. And through it all, John watched from a distance, quietly observing. He had given her a chance, and he was pleased to see her taking it seriously. He didn't need to say much. The work Karen was doing spoke for itself. She had learned a valuable lesson, one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The weeks passed, and Karen's efforts to change did not go unnoticed. She began to see a shift in the way people treated her, but more importantly, in the way she viewed the world around her. The lessons she had learned in her diversity and inclusion training weren't just concepts or theories, they were becoming real, practical changes in how she interacted with others. Still, Karen couldn't help but feel a little nervous every time she walked into a meeting. She was aware that she still had a lot to prove, not only to her colleagues but also to herself. John had been quiet for the most part, observing her progress from a distance. He hadn't said much since their initial meeting. His belief in second chances was unwavering, but he was also watching to see if Karen was truly committed to change or if this was just a phase. John wasn't someone who believed in giving up on people easily, but he knew that real change required consistent effort and honesty. He had given Karen the opportunity to prove herself, but the real test was how she would handle the responsibility of her actions in the long term. One afternoon, as Karen sat at her desk, reviewing a report, her phone buzzed. It was an email from John. It was short, just a few lines, but the message was clear. He wanted her to meet with him in his office at 3 p.m. Karen felt her heart race for a moment. She wasn't sure what to expect, but after everything that had happened, she knew that meeting with him could mean anything. She had made progress, but what if he felt she wasn't doing enough? When the time came, Karen gathered her things and walked to John's office, trying to keep her nerves in check. She knocked on the door and waited for his voice to invite her in. As she entered, she found John sitting at his desk, his hands folded in front of him. There was a calmness about him, but it was the kind of calmness that made Karen anxious. She wasn't sure if it was a good sign or not. "Karen," John said with a small nod. "Please, have a seat." Karen sat down, her hands resting on her lap, waiting for him to speak. She could feel the weight of the silence, and she wasn't sure what to say. She had been working hard to improve, but this was the moment that could define whether her efforts had been enough. "I've been watching you, Karen," John began. "I've seen the changes you've made, the way you've been treating your colleagues, the way you've been learning. And I have to say, I'm impressed. You've taken responsibility for what happened, and you've worked hard to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's something not many people would have done." Karen felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been uncertain about how John felt, but hearing him acknowledge her progress felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. Still, she knew this was only part of the journey. It wasn't over yet. "However," John continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I need to see more. It's not just about saying the right things or acting the right way for a short period. It's about consistency. We've seen your growth, but I want to see how you handle a real test. A real opportunity to prove to everyone here that you've truly changed." Karen listened intently, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what he meant, but she knew this was a critical moment. If she failed now, everything she had worked for could be in jeopardy. John leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm going to put you in charge of a new project," he said. "It's a leadership development initiative we're starting. You'll be responsible for selecting the team, organizing the work, and ensuring everything runs smoothly. It's a big task, and there will be people watching how you handle it. I need you to show them, not just me, that you've learned the lessons you've been taught. That you can lead with integrity and respect, not because you're in charge, but because it's the right thing to do." Karen's heart skipped a beat. A leadership project? It was exactly the kind of challenge she had been hoping for, but also the kind of responsibility that could either make or break her. She knew that this was her chance to prove that she had truly changed. "John, I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "I'll do whatever it takes to show that I can lead in the way you expect." John nodded, his expression softening just a little. "I know you will, Karen. But remember, it's not just about the results. It's about how you get there. The way you treat people, the way you build trust with your team, that's what matters most." Karen left John's office that day with a sense of purpose. She had a clear goal now, and for the first time in a long while, she felt excited about the challenge ahead. She immediately began planning for the new project, researching potential team members, setting goals, and thinking about how she could lead in a way that aligned with the values she had learned over the past few weeks. As she began working on the project, Karen started to realize just how much she had grown. She was no longer the person who assumed she was better than others. She now saw her role as one of support, not authority. She made a conscious effort to listen to her team, to respect their ideas, and to make decisions that considered everyone's perspectives. She wanted to create a culture of collaboration, not one where people followed her orders without question. The project quickly gained momentum, and Karen's team started to respond positively to her leadership. The respect that had once seemed so elusive began to come naturally. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt and challenges along the way, but Karen faced each one with the mindset of someone who had learned from her mistakes and was determined not to repeat them. One afternoon, as Karen sat with her team in a meeting, discussing the progress they had made, she noticed how much more confident and engaged everyone was. Her colleagues were contributing ideas, offering feedback, and working together toward a common goal. It was a stark contrast to the way things had been just a few months ago, when Karen had been more concerned with her own power and position than with the people she was supposed to be leading. John had been right, leadership wasn't about being in charge, it was about building relationships, trust, and respect. Karen had spent so much of her career focused on authority, but now she understood the real meaning of leadership. It was about making people feel valued, heard, and empowered. As the project came to a close, Karen felt proud of what her team had accomplished. The results were impressive, but more importantly, the way they had worked together was a testament to the kind of leader Karen had become. She had proven that she could lead with integrity, and that was something that would last far longer than any project or achievement. When Karen reported the final results to John, he gave her a smile that spoke volumes. "Well done, Karen," he said. "You've shown me and everyone else that you've truly changed. This project was a success, and it's because of your leadership." Karen felt a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. It wasn't just about getting things done, it was about doing things the right way. She had come a long way since the day she had slapped John in the lobby, and now, she was proud of the person she had become. But as John had said, the journey wasn't over. Karen knew that true change was a lifelong process. She would continue to learn, to grow, and to lead with the values that had become so important to her. And for the first time, Karen was confident that she was on the right path. Weeks turned into months, and Karen's transformation continued. She had taken the lessons from the incident to heart, and now, she was a completely different person, not just in the eyes of her colleagues, but in her own eyes as well. She had spent so much of her career focused on power, control, and her own position, but now she understood what real leadership meant. It was about respect, trust, and the ability to lift others up instead of looking down on them. She was no longer the woman who had slapped the CEO in a fit of arrogance. She was a woman who had learned the hard way, but also a woman who was determined to make things right. Her transformation wasn't just about changing her behavior, it was about changing her mindset. She had spent years judging others based on their appearances, their positions, and their backgrounds. Now, she was learning to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from. One day, as Karen walked into the office, she felt a sense of pride she had never experienced before. The atmosphere in the company had shifted, too. People were no longer afraid to speak up, to share their ideas, to be themselves. There was a new sense of openness, a new culture of respect and inclusivity. Karen had played a big part in that change. Her leadership development project had not only succeeded in its goals but had also inspired others to follow her example. Karen's reputation, once tainted by her mistake, was now being rebuilt. It wasn't just about the work she had done, it was about the way she had learned to connect with her team, the way she had made people feel valued and heard. She had worked hard to prove herself, not just to her colleagues, but to herself. And now, she could finally say that she was proud of who she had become. But it wasn't just the company that had changed. Karen's personal life had also been affected. She had begun to see her relationships with her family and friends in a new light. She had always been so focused on her career that she had neglected the people who mattered most. Now, she was taking the time to repair those relationships, to listen more, and to show the people she loved how much they meant to her. One evening, Karen sat down for dinner with her parents. It had been a while since they had all sat down together, just the three of them. They had always been supportive of her career, but Karen realized that she had never truly appreciated how much they had done for her. As they ate, she found herself listening more than talking, asking her parents about their lives, their experiences, and their dreams. She had spent so much time focused on herself that she had never really taken the time to understand the people around her. Her mother, noticing the change in Karen, smiled. "You seem different," she said. "In a good way. More present." Karen nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I've learned a lot lately, Mom. I've learned that it's not just about work or success. It's about people relationships, respect, and kindness." Her father, who had always been a man of few words, looked at her with a sense of pride. "I'm glad to hear that," he said quietly. "You've always had it in you, Karen. It's just good to see you realizing it." As Karen left her parents' house that evening, she felt a sense of peace that she had never felt before. She wasn't perfect, she knew she still had a lot of work to do, both personally and professionally, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that success wasn't about how much money you made or how high you climbed in the corporate world. It was about the impact you had on the people around you. At work, Karen continued to shine in her role. She had become a leader who inspired others, not through fear or authority, but through empathy, kindness, and a willingness to listen. Her team had grown stronger, and their success was a direct result of the culture of trust and respect she had fostered. Her colleagues, who had once been hesitant to speak up around her, were now more confident and engaged. They knew that their voices mattered, that their ideas were valued, and that they were part of something bigger than just a company. They were part of a community. One day, John called Karen into his office. She had become a trusted colleague, and they had developed a professional relationship based on mutual respect. As she walked into his office, she could tell he had something important to discuss. "Karen," John said, his tone serious but not stern. "I've been watching your progress. You've done more than just improve yourself. You've inspired this entire company. The culture here has changed because of you." Karen felt a sense of humility wash over her. She had worked hard, but she had never expected such high praise. "Thank you, John," she said softly. "I've learned a lot. And I know I still have a long way to go." John smiled. "We all do," he said. "But I want you to know that you've made a real difference here. And that's something not many people can say." As Karen left John's office, she felt a sense of accomplishment like never before. She had worked hard to rebuild her reputation, but more importantly, she had worked hard to rebuild herself. She had proven that it was possible to change, to grow, and to lead with integrity. And that, she realized, was the greatest achievement of all. Over the next few months, Karen continued to lead with the same humility and compassion that had become the cornerstone of her leadership style. She was no longer the arrogant, judgmental manager who had slapped the CEO. She was a leader who understood the value of every person, who treated everyone with respect, and who worked tirelessly to create an environment where everyone could thrive. And as Karen sat in her office, reflecting on how far she had come, she realized that the journey wasn't just about correcting a mistake, it was about becoming the best version of herself. It was about using the lessons she had learned to make a difference in the lives of others, both in and out of the workplace. John had given her a second chance, and she had made the most of it. But Karen knew that her work wasn't finished. The journey of self-improvement and leadership was ongoing, and she was committed to continuing to learn, grow, and inspire others along the way. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly fulfilled, not because of her job title or her accomplishments, but because of the positive impact she was making in the world around her. And that, she knew, was the real measure of success.